Iran and Venezuela, they've also developed a very important and extensive relationship in the last couple of years, especially both countries being under sanctions. Lula, the Brazilian president, received Maduro, I think, for the first time in a long time. He, this act alone, plus Lula mentioning a transition away from the dollar. Did you have any thoughts on that and the situation in Latin America?
Well, I was invited to Venezuela a couple of months ago, and I spent a week there. I was in the capital the whole time. There was so many things to do, so I never had the opportunity to visit any of the beautiful places in the country, like the Amazon and so on, or the sea. But it was a fascinating trip, and the Venezuelans, despite the hardships, they've done they've done their best to keep the impoverished well fed, and that's something that I saw, how the government supports those who are more vulnerable, and of course they are vulnerable partially at least because of the sanctions. The new relationship that is now being brought back, or let's say the relationship that's being brought back to life between Venezuela and Brazil, and of course among different countries in Latin America, I think is very promising, and it's going to make the Americans very unhappy, and I think they are very unhappy as it is. So the isolation of Venezuela, or the attempt to continue isolating Venezuela by the Americans and by the Europeans, by continuing their attempts to make ordinary Venezuelans suffer, to break the back of the Venezuelan economy, it's going to become much more difficult in future, because Latin American countries, South American countries will be increasingly ignoring Western demands to keep Venezuela isolated. And it's sort of like it's similar to West Asia as well, because we see a similar shift across West Asia. The Saudis, for a host of different reasons, they've chosen to improve relations with Russia, they've chosen to increase their ties with China, and they've chosen to evolve their relationship with Iran. And that has led to rapprochement between most Arab countries, or most Arab governments, and the Syrian government. And we saw President Assad in the Arab League summit. So what we see happening in Latin America is happening in West Asia as well. And I think the reason this is happening is because, I think there are a host of reasons. One is that the United States and Europe continue to decline. And I think that the war in Ukraine and the tensions with China, the unnecessary tensions with China and the unnecessary war in Ukraine, they act as catalysts to quicken the decline of the United States and its allies. And that gives more space for countries in the global south. And of course, when you see presidents or prime ministers come to power in these global south countries that are strong and who want independence from the West, that of course makes it even more difficult for the United States and its allies. Saudi Arabia, when it sees that the United States is growing weak, when they see the United States is unable to, let's say, protect them, or unable to control them, you can interpret it in different ways, or maybe both at the same time, then for their own sake, they, as Westerners say, they want to hedge their bets. They want to have better relations with everyone, to play it safe, or to explore new opportunities. Again, you can look at it both ways. And so the Saudis chose to change their relationship, their relationship with Iran. And I know I'm sort of moving away from the topic a bit, but
No, please go on.
I just want to remind your viewers that the Iranians moved to decrease tensions with Saudi Arabia over 3 years ago, when General Soleimani was on his way to Baghdad and to the Prime Minister's office. The Americans assassinated him at
Right.
Baghdad International Airport at, I think, roughly 1 a.m. And as we learned later from the former Iraqi Prime Minister, Dr. Adel Abdul Mahdi, he said that General Soleimani was to meet me at 8 in the morning, in other words, 7 hours later, to discuss a letter from the Saudis about decreasing tensions and rapprochement and these sort of issues. So I think one of the reasons why he was assassinated was because the Americans did not want rapprochement.
Right.
Of course, the Americans also wanted revenge because General Soleimani led the coalition against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and he was the most important reason for their defeat in Syria and Iraq. But I think it also had to do with the fact that the Americans were adamant on keeping Saudi Arabia and Iran divided. And the Americans have a lot of influence in Iraq, and they know exactly what's going on. So they murdered him. But later on, the Iraqis wanted to mediate again, and progress was made.
There were many meetings.
Yes, and what impeded the reestablishment of relations was that the Saudis wanted Iran to decide on behalf of Yemen, to make decisions on behalf of Yemen, which Iran refused. Ultimately, when the Chinese wanted to broker at the request of the Saudis the talks, when they wanted to mediate, and the Iranians accepted, the Saudis withdrew that demand, and so relations were reestablished. So things are changing, whether you look at Latin America, whether you look at West Asia, or whether you look at East Asia and Indonesia, ASEAN countries, and so on. Things are changing. Things are moving pretty rapidly. When you look at it and compare the situation today from a few years ago, things are moving forward very fast.